It's a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
I can only hope that our traditional democratic institutions and structures will minimize the disaster, but it's a disaster. There's just no two ways about it. And it will, I fear, spread and affect people in other countries. You know, and I think it will influence who wins the election in France.
Exactly.
It may influence who wins the election in Germany.
Yeah.
And then we really have a disaster on our hands, a worldwide disaster. So it's not just the direct influence of the United States, it's also the message that gets sent to similarly right-wing politicians in other societies. I think dozens and dozens of universities have done similar things. It's as if there was a mass shooting in your community, and you think, you know, the members of your community are incredibly fragile and vulnerable and need counseling and support. You know, no meetings to organize political activity, meetings to care for people, hug them, and reassure them. It was really quite an astonishing thing. And in terms of anxiety, certainly, you know, people like immigrants have a lot to be anxious about, but you see it even more sadly in young people, like teenagers, who don't have the perspective to imagine that this is something that, you know, the country can recover from or respond to in a way that's makes it less of a disaster. So I have a 14 and a 16-year-old granddaughters, and they're terrified. Well, I think it was a terrible choice. One, as I said before, we can understand in retrospect, but there is no consistent view that's being presented. The policies that are being offered may make people feel better in the short run, but they're not going to solve the problems. I don't think they're going to solve the problems that motivated people to vote for him. And what will end up happening is even more kind of despair and cynicism about what government can do. So yes, we made a bad choice. Well, so I think that's a very good question, and I think that there is a striking shortage of wisdom on both sides. And what I mean by that is that people on my side demonize people who disagree with us. You know, we take complex people who have multiple characteristics, some of them extremely positive, some of them not so positive, and we simplify and reduce them down to who they're voting for in the election. And so they become the personification of evil because they're voting for somebody who we think is evil. So there's a decided lack of wisdom on my side of the political fence, just as there is on the other side. I think an appreciation that people who may disagree with you may have a point, a willingness to listen, really listen, with open to the possibility that you might change your mind as a result of what you hear. An ability to take the perspective of other people, which is not easy, especially when they're very different from you in almost every way, would have served the Democrats, the Hillary supporters well, and we're just as guilty of a lack of those attributes of wisdom as are the people who triumphed. So the polarization, I would say, the political polarization that characterizes the U.S. and many other places these days is really a symptom of the absence of wisdom in entire societies. Well, but here's the funny thing. I think we do use wisdom in our everyday lives. I think when we interact with our neighbors, when we interact with, the shopkeeper who we're buying from, we don't behave in the same way. We make this distinction between how we deal with people in our day-to-day lives and how we deal with people more abstractly. We demonize from a height of 30,000 feet. We don't demonize when we're on ground level. So we already know how to treat other people. We just don't do it when the other people are distant from us. And I must say, the explosion of digital communication has only made this problem worse. Because what it does is it enables people, everybody, to live in a bubble and or an echo chamber. And what happens is that as you make a contribution, you tweet something, and then you read somebody else's tweets, and you just get more and more worked up and more extreme, so that by the end of the day, if you were sort of somewhere in the middle, by the end of the day, you're all the way on one or the other extreme, because you have read such outrageous claims about the people on the other side that it seems inconceivable that anyone who supports those people could be a decent human being. There's a lot of debate right now about whether Facebook contributed to the outcome of the election simply by providing a forum for these kinds of claims to be made and then amplified and amplified and amplified again and again and again. And of course what they say is, excuse me, we're neutral. Whatever people want to say, they say. We don't filter. This is an incredible tool for democratic citizen participation. That's what they say publicly. But they're, I think, extremely concerned privately that the very existence of this structure may have contributed to the outcome of the election, which is not an outcome they wanted, near as I can tell. And 2 billion people this is where most people get their news these days. They don't read newspapers. They don't even watch it on television. They get most of their news from Facebook. With unfiltered, no reporters, nobody who knows how to get at the truth. People talking about things they don't know anything about and having a dramatic influence. So we got a lot of work to do, because at least in the U.S., the press has always been a significant sort of moderator of extremism. The press was quite diverse. Reporters really did their homework. They didn't get it right all the time, but they knew a lot more than the people who were reading the things they wrote. And different newspapers went at problems in different ways, so you got a multiple perspectives on complicated issues. And I think the press has lost most of those attributes and most of the respect of the public. Trump has done enormous damage here too by, attacking the press. Every time the press criticizes him, he just attacks them. Well, you take the press away, and all you got is Facebook. And the press is basically dying in this country. And I think that this institution may be as much what distinguishes the U.S. from societies where democracy is much more of a struggle than anything else. And you see it happening in Europe too. Europe used to have, most European countries used to have many daily newspapers, but the economics of running a newspaper has made it almost impossible to sustain. So now there are many fewer newspapers than there used to be. And the trash newspapers have all the circulation, get all the readers, and the serious newspapers find it harder and harder to maintain themselves, and harder to pay salaries to reporters who will actually get at the truth. So the same thing is happening in Europe. And it's a very serious problem that the government can't fix. I don't know. I don't know how you fix this problem. Yeah, but you know, the funny thing is that the line between opinion and fact has been essentially erased. You know, so I could get on a soapbox and scream at the top of my lungs, vote for Hillary, vote for Hillary, vote for Hillary. I'm stating my opinion, and Facebook just gives me a bigger soapbox. But it's not just that. It's not just people saying, I believe this is the way to go, or I believe that's the way to go. It's people making factual claims. It's, I believe this is the way to go because, and then they give you a whole account of why that's based on nothing. And and people don't take the trouble to validate these factual claims, so-called factual claims. And it's sort of the only information they get. And indeed, if Hillary were a murderer and a crook and a liar, then I wouldn't vote for her either. You know, and if Obama were not a citizen of the United States, I wouldn't have voted for him. So there's nothing to check. And, you know, the elites, people who live on the coasts, have just assumed that these ridiculous claims would die of their own ridiculousness. They weren't even worth addressing because they were so preposterous. Well, that turns out not to be true. My take on wisdom, which I derive from Aristotle, is that wisdom is doing the right thing at the right time in the right way for the right reason. And that's obviously a very vague statement, but part of Aristotle's point was that the right thing to do is very much dependent on context, very much dependent on the situation. There aren't general rules that you can follow that tell you always what to do, because rules need to be bent. Sometimes rules need to be broken. And wise people know how to bend the rules and when to bend the rules and when to break the rules. Because even when you're trying to do the right thing, and an example I use when I talk about this, you know, tell the truth is a good rule. And be kind is a good rule. And often those two rules are in conflict. You're having a conversation with a friend. Is this a situation that calls for honesty or for kindness? And the answer is it depends on the situation. So we can all walk around with these very good rules of conduct and still not know what to do when an actual challenging interpersonal interaction confronts us. So that's what I think wisdom is, and what people don't often appreciate who work on wisdom is that for Aristotle, it was a moral term. It wasn't just being able to use your judgment. It was being able to use your judgment so that you would do the right thing. You know, the way, again, when I talk about this, point I try to make is that it may seem that most of the interactions we have every day have no moral content. Interactions in the workplace, interactions when we go shopping, you know, the moral issues arise infrequently, and we want to have good values so that we make the right moral decisions. And what I try to suggest is that every situation we're in that involves interacting with another human being is a moral situation, which means that moral decisions are not rare, they're routine. We make moral decisions a dozen times a day. Every time I teach a class, I'm making moral decisions about how to treat all the students in the class. Every time a parent does anything in raising kids, the parent is making moral decisions about whether to be strict or kind, whether to treat all the kids the same or whether to treat each kid differently. So life is a collection of moral decisions, and Aristotle was telling us that the way to make these decisions is by using your judgment. I think the way you learn it is by practicing. We learn it by making mistakes. Children teach their parents how to be parents. Parents think they know exactly how they're going to raise their kids. You know, most parents I know, what they say to themselves is, well, I'm just going to do the opposite of what my parents did when they were raising me. And they're completely convinced that they know exactly what they're going to do. But the trouble is that kids are not like stones or plants. Kids have a mind of their own. Kids they don't play by the rules. And you quickly learn that this model you have for raising children is not going to work. You know, there's nothing in your rule book that tells you how to deal with this particular situation that your child has just confronted you with. You know, your child took an extra piece of candy. You know, a lie has been told. How do you treat this lie? Is it devastating? Is your child a moral monster? What's the right thing to do? So children teach us how to be parents. Friends teach us how to be friends. The people we supervise teach us how to be supervisors. And what that means is that we're going to make lots of mistakes, and we need to be open and attentive to the feedback we get from our decisions so that the mistakes get less and less serious and less frequent. And over time, you become a wise leader instead of an unwise leader, a wise parent instead of an unwise parent. So this class I teach on wisdom with my colleague, who I wrote the book with, I think a lot of the students take this class thinking that we're going to teach them how to be wise, and the first thing we tell them is that that's not what's going to happen. Instead, what we're going to try to teach them is why it's so important to learn how to be wise, but the way you learn it is basically by living with your eyes and ears open, and profiting from your mistakes. Yeah, well, I don't know how to think about free will. You know, it's possible we don't have free will. It's possible that everything we do is the product of forces acting on us that influence us, and psychologists haven't figured out how all those forces interact, and maybe someday we will. But as a practical matter, I think every society I'm aware of, it depends on the assumption that people are free to act, even though influenced. You know, at the moment of, even though influenced, you walk into that voting booth and it's up to you who you're going to pull the lever for. You are free to make the choice between Trump and Clinton. Although you have been heavily influenced, up until that moment, the ultimate decision is yours to make, and you bear responsibility. And I don't know how we could live as a society without assuming that, because we want to hold people responsible for their actions. You know, and if a rock falls from the 100th story of a skyscraper and it lands on my head and kills me, we don't blame the rock. If a person falls from the 100th story of a skyscraper and falls on me and kills me, we don't blame the person. So you want to distinguish those purely physical interactions from the kinds of activities we engage in where we should bear responsibility because we made a choice we could have chosen differently, and the consequences of the choice are something that we have to own up to. Mm-hmm. Even if ultimately we're able to explain all of these choices that people make, I'm still not sure we could do away with the notion that people are responsible for their actions and thus free. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't claim people were responsible for their actions if they weren't free to do them. Yeah, look, there are people who think ultimately the ultimate responsibility for everything rests with some divine entity. You know, nothing happens by accident. There is a plan. We're not smart enough to know the plan. Yes, you know, there are people who take comfort from that kind of view. But even so, it wouldn't occur to you to blame the rock. Whereas if somebody takes a gun and shoots you, it would occur to you to blame the person. And I think we need to maintain that distinction in order to, to have a society where we expect people to behave in certain ways. They have to know that they're going to be held responsible for what they do. The way things are going, it seems to me that the thing to expect is that there will be more rules to follow. Anytime something goes wrong, people in control and authority think the way to prevent that from happening again is to make another rule and then enforce the rule. We don't worry much about developing character in people. And if you have people of good character, you don't need rules. Rules are substitutes for character. Assume the worst of people and then create a structure that prevents them from doing their worst, instead of cultivating the best in people and not feeling the need to have such a restrictive structure. And my reading of what's gone on in the last 20 or 30 years is things go wrong and we fix them not by changing the people who did those bad things, but by instituting rules so that they won't be able to do it again. That's how we tried to solve the financial crisis, and I'm reasonably confident that what ends up happening is you make a rule that prevents what happened yesterday, but doesn't stop what's going to happen tomorrow. There are many different ways to screw things up, and all rules do is prevent you from doing the things that screwed things up in the past, not the things that will screw things up in the future. The only way to prevent that is if you go into your financial interactions with people with the desire to do right by them rather than to exploit them. But I see very little sign that anyone trusts anyone else to do the right thing just because it's the right thing. No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the great thing about following rules is that if something goes wrong, you blame the rules. I was just following orders. I was just doing what I was supposed to do. I didn't make these rules. Somebody else made the rules. They're responsible. You're absolutely right. I think it's a lifelong project to reverse this trend that appeals increasingly to rules or to incentives. You make it worth my while to do the right thing, and I'm more likely to do the right thing. It's been a lifetime that put us in this situation, and it's going to take a long time to unwind it and rebuild confidence in the judgment of individual citizens, and rebuild the character of individual citizens so that that confidence is warranted, is justified. It's no fun to worry about problems that are easily solved. Well, we certainly seem to want to be happy, especially these days. My own view, what the research suggests is that the most important determinants of happiness are our relations with other people and our relations with our work. If we get real satisfaction out of our work and we have a close network of people we love and who love us, chances are we're going to be happy. And what that means to me is that, and this is another Aristotelian view, happiness is something that you achieve indirectly. If you do the right thing, one of the byproducts of that is you're happy. If you try directly to be happy, chances are you will fail. If you cultivate good relations with other people because they're worthy of your respect and admiration, if you commit yourself to your work because when you do your work well, other people benefit, lo and behold, you wake up one morning and you have a big smile on your face and you say, where did this come from? And the answer is it came from good work and work and love, which is what Freud said were what made the world go round. So my view is that we put too much emphasis on how to be happy and not enough emphasis on how to do the things that will, as a consequence, make us happy. Mm-hmm. But obviously anyone would rather be happy than miserable. Mm-hmm. So what I suggest in the things I've written is that one of the byproducts of doing right by other people and doing good work is that it ends up making you happy. Mm. And what's good about that is that you can imagine now a positive feedback loop. You get happy, which makes you even more inclined to do right by other people and do good work, which makes you even happier. The people you serve are happy because they've been well treated by you. And the result is a kind of virtuous circle where the more people do the right thing, the more inclined they are to continue doing the right thing. At the moment, we're going in the opposite direction, so we need to change the direction of this circle. But I think it's possible. It may be the sort of thing that's only possible in times of relative affluence and security, when people are worried about keeping their jobs, keeping their homes, and being able to support their families. I think they become desperate and they'll do anything in order to produce that. When times are less perilous and more secure, I think people have more space to ask, what does it mean to be a good person in the world I'm living in? So these are hard times in a lot of societies like yours, and it seems almost like a luxury to worry about whether you're a good person, when instead what you're worrying about is whether you're going to have a job next week. But, these hard times come and go. There will be times when everyone feels a little bit more relaxed about the immediate day-to-day needs of life and can ask, is this the way I want to be? Is this the kind of person I want to be in the world? Mm-hmm. And then we need to be there ready with advice about what's worth putting effort into and what isn't. Well, so Aristotle, again, thought that after a while it becomes a habit. So the answer then, if he's right, is yes, you need to motivate yourself, but eventually it simply is what you do automatically. Mm-hmm. When somebody comes into the shop asking for something, you automatically ask yourself, what does this person really need and how can I meet that person's need? Instead of, what's the most stuff I can sell to this person? It's effortful and requires motivation in the early going and becomes more and more automatic as you do it more and more. So that's one. Aristotle, I think, thought it was too hard, too demanding to expect people to be deliberately choosing the right thing all the time. You needed to rely on some habitual actions. And that usually means that you need to be operating in a social structure that makes it easy for you to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be an outlaw. You don't have to be super heroic. You don't have to put yourself on the line. Most people won't do that, or they won't do it consistently. So you need to be in an environment where it's easy to do the right thing. And then that becomes your sort of first response when you encounter a coworker or a customer. Psychology really tries, in its pursuit of being a, quote, science, it really tries to stay away from telling people which values they should have. Mm-hmm. It's much more about, given the values you have, how can I help you achieve your desires? I think that's cowardly on the part of psychology. I think psychologists should be willing to tell people, you're living life the wrong way, you're pursuing the wrong things, these other things are more important, more valuable, and they will end up giving you more satisfaction. But that's not how psychologists operate, at least not in my experience. What I think psychologists can do that would make a major contribution is talk to the people who organize workplaces so that they reorganize the workplaces in a way that makes it relatively easy for people to do the right thing and relatively unattractive for them to do the wrong thing. And this culture of bonuses, most of your compensation coming from bonuses by meeting targets and putting workers in direct competition with one another is exactly is a toxic environment if you're trying to encourage people to do the right thing. You're basically begging people to cheat, lie, and steal when you create environments like this. And then when people cheat, lie, and steal, you're shocked that it happened. So I think psychologists potentially have a huge role to play, not as management consultants rather than as individual psychotherapists. And you see more and more of that actually happen. Psychologists end up in business schools and they do work on management and organizational behavior. If you do that, if you whisper in the ear of somebody who runs a company, you can change the lives of hundreds of people instead of just one person at a time. Thank you for watching the interview. I hope that you found something of value in what I've said. You should take great pride that my own work was so heavily influenced by one of the giants of your own intellectual past, Aristotle.